Okay, welcome to week one of Sports and the Law, examining the legal evolution of America's three major leagues. In this Zoom world, we thought we would flip the classroom by giving a little preview to the readings, the required readings and the optional readings and the updated links for the commissioner's powers, the commissioner authority, the moral integrity of the sport, the role of the commissioner, and the law. And I have with me my longtime assistant at Magis LLC, Aaron Caputo. He's going to stay with us through the NFL update. And then we have Zach and Ryan to join us for NBA and MLB exclusively. So thank you for setting this up. And we've got the script, PowerPoint uploaded. And the first thing we want to bring to the class's attention is the change in the commissioner's power that was negotiated in Article 46 of the 2020 CBA. It was ratified in March of 2022. And as our PowerPoint tells you, this is a pretty important change, because instead of the NFL commissioner, as he had been, judge, jury, and executioner, so to speak, under the personal conduct policy, as you can see from the script that's been, PowerPoint that's been uploaded, in this case, there will be an initial determination by a disciplinary officer who's been jointly selected and appointed by the parties. Now, appeals will still be heard by Commissioner Goodell. So the PowerPoint tells us this signifies a slight power shift. He's no longer the judge, jury, and executioner, but he's still the judge and the executioner. Now let's just be clear about this. This is only in the area of the personal conduct policy, Article 46. Otherwise, virtually every other grievance has been negotiated to be heard by someone other than the commissioner, whether it be an injury grievance or any other kind of grievance. So in that regard, we sort of go next to Myles Garrett, a fan favorite of ours. Aaron, thanks for putting this together. We have links that give you the more specifics on each of these PowerPoint items. As we all know, he swung his helmet at Mason Rudolph, one of the worst on-field incidents we've seen in a long, long time. He was suspended indefinitely, appealed, and he ended up having a 6th game, which was the rest of the season. And then he met with Roger Goodell. The commissioner was reinstated by the NFL. Now this goes to Chapter 1. This goes to on-field, off-field conduct. This goes to the study guides in the back of the book, which have a CBA cheat sheet attached there too. Of course, with the NFL CBA, we're going to be providing updates throughout the course. But take us through, how does the Myles Garrett incident, Aaron, as we've studied it, comport with commissioner's authority? This really, at the end of the day, this was an unprecedented penalty for perhaps an unprecedented on-field, near criminal. I mean, there are criminal charges that were being talked about in connection with it, but Mason Rudolph never pressed charges.
Yeah, correct. So obviously, as we remember, helmet swing, and then Myles Garrett was suspended for suspended indefinitely. Through the end of the regular season, through the playoffs. He did appeal. His arguments were kind of precedence-based as well as CBA-based. In terms of precedent, they found video evidence. There's I think it was a preseason game in 2013 where Antonio Smith swung his helmet at Richie Incognito's helmet at Richie Incognito. Only got a 1-game suspension. And then also, I think Myles Garrett also argued that, you couldn't suspend someone indefinitely under the CBA for on-field conduct. So those were his two appeal arguments. Ultimately, they were not upheld, or the suspension was upheld. The appeal was not awarded to him. So it ended up being 6 games after he had to meet with Commissioner Goodell to be reinstated after the season. So it was the last 6 games of the Browns season. He had to meet with Commissioner Goodell because he was suspended indefinitely, not for a set number of games as he would usually be under the on-field conduct policy. So this is where it kind of relates to commissioner authority, and that in this kind of unprecedented act, this unprecedented punishment, the authority ultimately came back to the commissioner to determine whether or not he should be ultimately reinstated in the league after his indefinite suspension came up.
Terrific, thanks. And lots more to follow, lots of links, both here attached to this PowerPoint and also in what we call the vault. And those are the links that have been added to the Canvas course site. Antonio Brown, boy, we practically taught the whole course around Antonio Brown. So much can be said about his off-field antics. ultimately, bottom line, suspended 8 games for as many off-field incidents. There's a couple of links there that give you some of the background. Obviously, personal conduct policy, obviously Article 46. These are off-field versus on-field. Again, Chapter 1 distinguishes in the legal evolution of the major leagues how on-field, off-field across each of the 3 major leagues gets different treatment. There's also page 281, the study guide. Again, we'll be updating all these things throughout the course, but it gives you a good example. I don't know, it's almost like Miles Garrett. Some of them are not to be laughed at. Some of the things Antonio Brown did off field just really made me wonder, as many did, how long a suspension he would get. And I suppose eight games seems appropriate under the circumstances, given, like cases being treated alike. His were unlike almost anything else we had seen. So right. 8 games. Go ahead if you want to elaborate. There are some other links.
I think suspension was based on a series of conduct, right? It wasn't
right.
just an incident like usual. It was, there was alleged sexual assault, some vulgar text messages. There was a burglary and battery in January. He had sent tweets about Patriots ownership, the NFL. I think it was kind of a culmination of that, which led to the 8 games, and based on precedents, seemed about right. And yeah, so I think he's agreed not to appeal. He's going to accept the 8-game suspension. So after the first 8 games of the season, if he signs with the team, then after those first 8 games, he'll be back and ready to play.
Okay, so much there. Josh Shaw, this is another part of Chapter 1, and it's a good update on gambling. This goes back to the Black Sox scandal. Gambling is the one thing that the leagues cannot abide for lots of good reasons. And since this class last convened, we've got this case of Josh Shaw suspended at least through the 2020 season for betting on NFL games on multiple occasions. And he violated the gambling policy. Again, this runs across each of the 3 leagues. You can see it there in the PowerPoint. All NFL personnel are prohibited. All NFL personnel, let me emphasize that, placing, soliciting, facilitating any bet, whether directly or indirectly through a third party, on any NFL game, practice, or other event, includes betting on game outcomes, statistics, score, performance of any individual, or any other kind of proposition bet, prop bet, on which wager is offered. So this is do not pass go, do not collect $200. This gambling, we have examples going back historically, but now this has been concretized, finalized in each of the 3 major leagues. Collective agreements and rules of proceeding that you cannot and will be severely punished for any form of violating the gambling policy. Each league deals with it somewhat differently, but in updating this part of the book and this first chapter on commissioner's authority, this really goes to the heart of the integrity of the game. And maybe you want to just add on some of the links there. This is just, game, set, match, as they say in tennis, caught red-handed, and he's going to have to pay the price.
Right, and this rarely happens. There's a reason why there's only a few links to it in the actual textbook. This doesn't happen that often. So, and obviously all leagues have very strict penalties on it, since almost their inception, and especially with the Black Sox scandal. But, as you said, every league treats it differently, but in every league, it's, no, and no, you cannot do this. All exceptions, but, with like some daily fantasy with under a certain amount in wagering, fantasy, season-long fantasy, and some other intricacies that are in the gambling policy. But for the most part, we're not gonna tolerate this in any of the leagues.
And just for the class, this is going in seriatim fashion. This gambling would be at page 20 of the book. Updates to the same. You can see how the legal evolution. We even reference MLB's anti-gambling policy at page 20 of the book, posted prominently on MLB locker rooms, and of course, historically, the Pete Rose case, which is summarized at page 20 and 21, and the Molina's case are interesting historical sort of artifacts when these things, used to go to court. And what we are going to learn throughout this course is by collectively bargaining these things, by not grieving the imposition of rules across the board as to what will happen if, when, then, we see very little, if any, cases are going to be able to escape to court. They're going to go to final binding arbitration because they relate to a collectively bargained and or not aggrieved imposition of a rule. So that's a great theme to watch throughout the course. Next, I guess we're going to go to, sorry, those of you who are Patriots fans, they got pretty much caught red-handed. Lots of links to go along with it to try to explain it away, but there they were at the Browns game, filming the field and sidelines of the Bengals during a Browns game. I was there December 8th last year. Fine of 1.1 million, loss of a third-round pick. Reminiscent of Spygate, reminiscent of, not Deflategate, I guess that's different, but there's a study guide on Deflategate for sure. Go ahead and just elaborate on that. We've got some links to provide further detail, but they pretty much, all Bill Belichick could say was, oh gosh, they're not part of football operations, so I'm not, I don't know the person. I don't know that man, kind of thing.
Right. There were a couple excuses made, I think, or explanations to try and explain the conduct away, but ultimately it was, again, kind of, you got caught red-handed. This is something you're not allowed to do. Mens rea is not really going to play a role. It was wrong, and then they find them appropriately under the policy, of not being allowed to use electronics videotape, the sidelines, things like that, as they had the authority to do under that policy. So again, not a whole lot to elaborate on this one. It was kind of a game, set, match in tennis terms. Yeah, that's kind of.
Yes, it was. Oh my. Okay. Well, thank you very much for kicking that off. Again, this is tracking the book. It's tracking the study guides in the back of the book. It's tracking commissioner's authority and the evolution of punishment for on-field, off-field conduct since we last convened this class. And now it's time to switch over to our MLB expert. And we've got two really important updates here: the Houston Astros sign stealing scandal, and then we'll go to the Red Sox, which was a slightly different, hesitate even to call it a scandal the way it ultimately came out. But these were major commissioner investigations, major hours and hours and months, and thousands of emails were examined, and people were investigated upside and downside and sideways. And finally, when the discipline came out, what we have here obviously is a 1-year suspension for the Astros of GM Jeff Luhnow, a 1-year suspension for the manager AJ Hinch, forfeiture. This really hurts an organization, any organization, first and second round picks, and a fine maximum allowed of $5 million. Again, lots of links there. We don't want to burden this introductory video too much, except to hand it off to our MLB expert. And Ryan, welcome to our gallery view. And go ahead, we've asked you to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into the MLB links that we'll be going through. What do you think? And then, of course, Commissioner Manfred went a lot easier on the Red Sox, and maybe we want to juxtapose these two. Do you think the commissioner got them right in each case, or if you were making the call, would you have come out slightly differently, being the baseball expert that you are, Ryan? If you could switch to Ryan's view. Sure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, what you saw, I think, particularly with the Astros investigation, was almost like a tale of two punishments, right?
Yep.
His coverage was how unprecedented it was, how wide-ranging it was, and how impactful it was. But then as you got player reaction, it seemed almost to shortchange what they thought was a very egregious violation of their trust and integrity of the game, and thought players should be punished. And while the commissioner gave immunity to the players, even without that, there was likely not to be a lot of punishment, because it shows the extent of the commissioner's authority on one end with these major draft penalties and the punishments to the manager, GM, and the organization, but also the limitations on his ability to punish the players for something that was really unheard of in modern times with modern CBAs. And then the Red Sox scandal came out a lot later, and that was because of the extensiveness of the investigations revealed that, while they were doing the same thing, they were just doing it to a drastically less extent. While the Astros at times were doing it on every pitch and banging garbage cans, the Red Sox, I think, were for a small single-digit percentage of plays were considered to be doing it, and that's how they differentiated the two.
And do you think, was it necessary and sufficient to grant immunity to the players, many of whom were interviewed with immunity, that they, if they had participated, they were promised, no action would be taken against them for having participated?
I think it was necessary in the sense if you want to get to the honest conclusion of what happened and really restore the integrity and, you know, the character of the game, which is the commissioner's possible ultimate goal is to uphold, you know, the integrity of the game. But on another sense, no, I think, you know, the players were the ones ultimately benefiting from the cheating. So it would have possibly behooved the commissioner to maybe, at least from the outset, try and find a way in which players could be held accountable for this as well. But realistically, we only know what we know about the scandal because of the interviews from the players and their forthrightness based on their immunity.
And it was really Mike Fires, right, who went public and said, hey, it's been going on for a long time and it just shouldn't be happening anymore. That's one of the links. And I guess we should also, you know, mention that really Cora is not managing the Red Sox this year, not because of the Red Sox sign stealing scandal. So for those of you Red Sox, the sign stealing incident, where just, if you could scroll down a little bit, Aaron, you can see, I mean, there really wasn't much of a discipline. It was a video replay operator, JT Watkins banned, as opposed to what we saw in the Astros case. Second round pick in the Twin, former manager Alex Cora is banned, but it was only for his conduct with the Astros. They didn't find he had done really anything wrong while with the Red Sox. Did you find that a curious outcome, right? And Cora was happy for it. He could be back next year, and the Red Sox are having a tough year so far without him.
Yeah, I mean, having not been on the inside of the investigation, I did find it quite curious that they had this character that they knew had committed basically at the center of the biggest cheating scandal in modern times, who then moved to another team, and they said they had no direct evidence of it and didn't really have any sort of skepticism of that or more thorough inquiry.
Okay, excuse me. For those of you who are Red Sox fans, I'm happy. Okay, and then we have many in the audience. So now, Joe Kelly, here we go. Now we're going to get into COVID-19 frequently throughout. We almost have to. How you know it's impacted the three major leagues. We'll have a whole segment coming on that, but here we go. We've already had these kinds of things happening. We've had brawls. We've had suspensions with the Astros. We put it in here because right, people are still kind of mad at the Astros, Ryan. Right? Are we talking the same language here?
Yeah, I think this is the player's answer to your question of was the sufficient. I think we're getting a resounding no on that.
Okay, so we'll watch that space. We've got some links. This all goes to Commissioner's Authority, Commissioner's Powers, MLB, page 5 and following, plus study guides. And now we're going to go to the NBA where, you know, as we tape this, we're right in the middle of the beginning of the bubble playoffs, which is great. It's great they've been able to do that with hardly any, I think 0 so far, COVID positive testing. Maybe the other leagues will take a hint from that. And Aaron, with your hosting permission, please take us over to our NBA expert, Zach, and welcome aboard. We've got tampering. We've got putting teams sort of together behind everybody's back. Commissioner Silver doesn't like that. He wants to maybe increase the fine to $10 million. I mean, how do we stop, no offense, LeBron from orchestrating what team he wants to have sort of a year in advance? I'm just saying that as a LeBron fan. Maybe that's good for the game. Maybe that's in the best interest of the game, but tampering obviously is something that can't be done. And Zach, if you could, Aaron, you could switch us over to Zach. You can see the Warriors. He's going to be our NBA expert. Fined, you know, Draymond Green for violating the league's anti-tampering rule. You can see what Draymond said. All sorts of comments here. The Clippers. If you could scroll down just a little bit, and then we'll ask Zach, who worked at the NBA legal department last year for part of his placement, you know, maybe a comment on why is this tampering? Why is the commissioner so upset about tampering in the NBA? Demanding trades publicly, sanctions for that. We see that. We'll see. We'll hold off on Isaiah Thomas for a second. These other links, Zach, if you could switch over to Zach, Aaron, we'll get his comments on this, having worked at the NBA league office. Yes, thanks for joining us. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think tampering is much maligned by the public and a lot of players, especially because the comments seem relatively tame. I mean, Draymond Green didn't say anything that out of the ordinary there, but I know during my time they mentioned it that it was something that was heavily requested and almost insisted by team owners, mainly because of the last free agency period where we saw players make huge free agency announcements the day of that free agency, the legal tampering period began. And it felt like these star free agents had immediately signed, and it felt rather clear that clearly there had been some backroom negotiations or something that was occurring that the NBA didn't want. And team owners were especially upset because it felt like they didn't get a chance to speak with any of these players. I think something that's interesting to note is, especially this season, given that all the players are in one location, it's of special concern to the NBA, given that they're worried that these players might be negotiating these backroom deals, like you mentioned, LeBron creating another super team. And one other thing is just the amount that they're finding these players. You see, it's $50,000, which makes sense because under commissioner authority in the NBA, under Article 35, the commissioner is allowed to fine each player a max of $50,000. And that if he does so, any appeal of that fine will go back to the commissioner. If it's above $50,000, any appeal would go to a third-party arbitrator. So it's interesting to see that for all three of these links, every single one is exactly $50,000. Oh, Professor, it looks like you're muted.
Yeah, you're reading right from the book. It's beautiful stuff. The NBA Commissioner's Authority, right there at pages 8 and 9. 50,000. And sort of the back and the forth, and we need to distinguish team versus league authority to punish. But at this level, 50,000 is the perfect number for reasons that the book explains. But then let's just judge. So Malice at the Palace is in the book. That's now an old one. We haven't had somebody go in the stands in a long time. There he was. They were heckling him. I shouldn't laugh. Those poor fans, I think, were banned for at least a year, from ever, maybe revoked permanently. They wanted a Frosty. Yeah, they wanted a Frosty, right? If he misses 2 free throws, they got a Frosty or something like that.
Yeah, sadly, as a Sixers fan, I can relate. They have a special basically. If any player misses 2 free throws, the entire stadium gets a free Frosty. For a long time, we were very bad, so it was a way to get us into the stands. But yeah, I guess they really wanted that Frosty because they yelled some things at him, and I guess he didn't take kindly to it.
Yeah, don't go in the stands. That's not a good idea. But that all goes to some of the history here. The Latrell Sprewell, as you go through the book, you'll see how the evolution. Right, again, I'm going to emphasize with each of the 3 leagues to the point where now it's almost self-executing as to what happens. Right, very little going all the way back to Miles Garrett ends up sort of at the complete discretion. Can he play or can't he, based on an interview that he had with the commissioner. Almost all of that is synchronized through the CBA, through the grievance procedures, to be decided, in ways that the union has agreed, which kind of leads us, really, stay with it, Zach. We have a ton of links on this, and we'll finish up with this probably. How is COVID, the update for the 3 leagues? But the reason we put NBA first is they really had pre-negotiated a force majeure clause, Article 39, Section 5. And, a lot of people were saying along the way, well, maybe they should have just pulled the plug. Maybe they should just invoke that clause. But, I think across the 3 leagues, the relationship there between the Players Association head and the commissioner is maybe the deepest and the richest. And they were able, so far, thank God, they've been able to work things out, I think, to everybody's satisfaction. There's still some loose ends. We'll get into those details. But these return to play negotiations and the non-invocation of the previously negotiated force majeure clause, which was embedded in the CBA. Maybe you just want to comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the force majeure clause is what makes the NBA negotiations the most unique. For those that basically don't know, the force majeure clause gave the NBA almost unilateral permission to basically invoke it, and it would reduce the players' salaries for a set amount for each game that was canceled. And the NBA didn't invoke it, and there were reports that the NBA didn't really consider invoking it, just given the possible consequences, the loss of goodwill, the possible antitrust litigation that we'll talk about later. But any negotiation, obviously, that happens in the backdrop of the NBA having the power to do this kind of pushes it along more towards coming to an agreement. And I think that's part of the reason why the two sides were able to come to an agreement so quickly and efficiently, because they knew what was the doomsday scenario. They laid it out to players. If you don't come up with something, and they could theoretically just cut your pay unilaterally.
Yeah, it's really instructive. And this will be a theme, maybe even a hypothetical for the class to consider, like, which of the three major leagues handled COVID the best and why and how, because then we go to MLB, which, I did a little piece that's posted on the syllabus on, it was a titanic struggle for MLB. It was back, forth, no games, yes games, no games, so many games, 60 games, 70 games. Maybe we switch back to Ryan as our MLB expert. Again, we got just so many links on this. We know now we're sort of into the season, but not perfectly. I mean, how many games have the Cardinals been able to play up to? I think they have 7 or 8 doubleheaders to make up for it. Will they be able to? And the Marlins were impacted. So maybe they'll do bubble for the playoffs. Who knows? But let's just focus on commissioner authority to cancel the season and the way that negotiation went down. And ultimately, he could impose that which he imposed, the 60-game season, Rob Manfred. But they still are holding on to a grievance over unfair labor practice charge. Ryan, maybe Aaron, you can switch us over to Ryan again. Again, we'll have even more links than this to walk us through their return to play protocols and negotiations. But Ryan, maybe you want to add on some of the detail to this update.
Yeah, absolutely, Professor. As you alluded to, the MLB and MLBPA reached an agreement in March. It was basically an agreement to agree. It was a letter that outlined what would happen, what they would strive to do for pay, for games, for health and safety, and then what they would do if they couldn't do that, which was the commissioner's unilateral authorities to implement rule changes and a new season and health and safety protocols and all of that. That letter was not the typical CBA. It was agreed to outside of and supplementary to the CBA, which really was heralded as a sign of progress at the time because it gave them the framework for how to move forward. But then, as you said, it was a titanic struggle moving forward from that for them to actually agree to something. And as Zach alluded to, MLB did not have what the NBA had, which was a clear doomsday scenario to invoke a force majeure clause and utilize that, which brought the parties together. In fact, the parties were sort of diverging apart the more they negotiated.
Yeah, and even since the season began, Ryan, right? Commissioner Manfred, who's a friend of our program for a long time, and he's had to say, look, if you don't comply with these protocols, I may have to cancel the season, right? I mean, he still has that commissioner authority, that ultimate commissioner authority, by virtue of the agreement to agree.
Yeah, so that's something they've broached a couple times, and as of recording this, he's tried to keep a strong face and say that they're not going to cancel the season, but particularly with the Miami Marlins, they've come up to the water's edge there, trying to figure out what happened, what they're going to do about it. And it's really led to a gray zone for MLB too, because the same office that investigated the Astros and the Red Sox sign stealing is investigating COVID outbreaks, but they promise there won't be disciplinary actions for it. But there's also the threat of the canceled season looming overhead. So it's creating a very difficult dynamic for these teams, especially the ones whose games are getting delayed or canceled, like the Cardinals.
And that's a really good point. We've got, of course, Clevenger and Plesac here in Cleveland who violated the protocol and got put on the restricted list. And they're actually training at our minor league facility here at Lake County for 10 days, and we'll see what happens there. That's more granular than we need to get at this point. But I guess I just want to come back to at the end of the day, they're holding on to a grievance. And do you think, like looking ahead, they're really holding that, the PA is, to say, hey, when we get to the big negotiation next time, when we renegotiate at the end of next year, what the CBA is going to look like, is that a grievance they're just going to kind of hold over the commissioner's head and say, we're still saying, because you went from 70 to 60 games, we lost money. We lost a lot of money.
Yeah, I think the bigger negotiation is at the crux of a lot of this, and a lot of it's proxy war for it. And it all comes back to, or most of it comes back to pay, which is their main grievance would be predicated on you were required in our letter to implement a schedule that allowed us to play the most games possible.
Right.
And because it took so long or dragged on, or because you hesitated for too long, we lost out on X amount of games, which results in X amount of dollars. And that might be made up somewhere else in a bigger negotiation, for whether it be higher minimum salaries or something that gets that paid back to them. But I think they will be holding on to that for a while because it could be up billions of dollars potentially in lost pay.
Right. And we do want to talk about, hey, and maybe we'll segue to NFL because it's pretty clear it was just recently negotiated. Hey, you don't play because of COVID, or you just opt out because you don't want to play. And what does that mean to service years, trying to achieve, get to salary arbitration? Clevenger will be the great example of that. If they hold him out much longer, they're going to control him for one more year because he won't have the sufficient service. Plesac would not be a Super 2 if they hold him back. I'm just using the Indians as a little bit of an example there. So all this, what counts, in terms of bonuses and guarantees and all the rest in a prorated season. But I do think maybe we'll just, rather than stay with MLB, I think NFL did the best job of kind of on the fly negotiating all of these things pretty clearly, and also smoothing out the salary cap for next year. Remember, you define gross revenue, basketball related income, all those things defined, and the percentage thereof is what goes to the Players Association. Let's just state that, right? And I think the NFL, DeMaurice Smith, I think this time did a really outstanding job, not only in the CBA itself, which we'll get to those updates in due course, but I think, Aaron, if you want to flip back to yourself, let's just go to that, and then we can sort of round third and head home. I mean, there were no force majeure provisions at all. So it's the antithesis. There was no agreement to agree. So we had the best case NBA, next best case agreement to agree MLB, worst case nothing NFL, right, Aaron? So they got through it. It was 4th and long, and they threw a Hail Mary, and they're in training camp. Let's see how long they can stay there. But
that's right.
Let's just go through the bullet points here, and then we'll probably flip through the rest just as an indicator of what else we want to cover in week 1. But the authority to cancel the season, the cancel games provision.
Yeah.
If you opt out, some things happen. If you opt out because you have one of 15 symptoms, that's one set of facts. If you opt out just because you don't want to play, that's another. I mean, they negotiated all of that on the fly.
Right. Yeah. So as you just said, Professor, there was no force majeure provision in the NFL CBA. It basically had, where the crux of this negotiation was around this cancel games provision, which basically just said, in the case 1 week or more of games are canceled, the parties will come to negotiate at arm's length, in good faith to basically figure out the salary cap and how that'll work in future years. It wasn't really related necessarily to even specifically a pandemic or epidemic, but it was just a very broad, just cancellation provision. And we had DeMaurice Smith talk at the University of Miami, and he's like, yeah, we included that, or, didn't include, certain things for a reason. Because this was coming, coronavirus was coming up in the beginning of March when this agreement was ratified. But so I think the NFL then, the agreement's ratified in March, all the stuff with COVID starts going down, and they figure, we have a couple months, we have some time to figure things out, and we'll, wait to see how things play out. And then if we, we'll come to an agreement on COVID protocols, return to play protocols and everything, when we need to. And the months went on, the summer went on, and then it got to about, July, and training camp was coming around the corner, and they're like, well, we now have to figure out, our protocols and what's going to happen so we can go play. Because obviously the worst case scenario for the NFL is not playing. They wanted to make sure that they played. And I think coming off of the ratified CBA, having that some sort of quasi labor piece in that area helps, help them get this agreement executed in July. So they get the agreement executed in July. Certain things, as you mentioned, if you opt out and you are at risk, quote unquote, which is, defined in the agreement, it's a $350,000 stipend for the year. I think your contract holds, and I can't remember if you get an accrued season. Yes,
I think you do. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so if you opt out and you are not at risk, it drops down from $350,000 to $150,000. And it's advanced on your contract salary.
Right.
So, I mean, and there are obviously other provisions, testing, how things like that work. Preseason was canceled, no preseason games. But it did come together relatively seamless for the NFL and the NFLPA, and that they executed it within, I would say, less than 2 weeks, at least, publicly. I mean, they may have been negotiating this privately for a while, but, from, as we were saying, kind of like the worst case scenario in terms of nothing guiding, what is going to happen in your CBA, no CBA provision guiding what's to happen going forward with the force majeure and COVID and everything. I think they did a pretty decent job getting something pulled together in those couple weeks to hopefully get the season back on track. And, it wasn't as comprehensive, as a bubble in the NBA or anything like that, but, it was a good agreement for them to come to in a pretty short period of time.
Because in football, obviously, a COVID outbreak could have such devastating impact. There's also a discipline schedule that was put in place by the NFL Management Council, which was one of the links that we'll add. But, there's suspensions and fines for going out to bars, clubs, or house parties without PPE, personal protective equipment. If there's more than 10 people, that's a high-risk COVID-19 conduct. Refusal to submit to testing, failure to wear masks when they should. Or a tracking device, failure to adhere to social distance protocols during team travel, like Clevenger did, traveling with Carlos Carrasco on the team plane after he'd been out at a dinner, will also result in fines. So very excellent, careful articulation of each and every possible scenario that could be envisioned, but still, you just don't know. You just don't know. Go ahead if you want to add to that, and then we can probably wrap this up.
They did have the wherewithal, going forward. I think one of the big pieces of that negotiation was salary cap going forward.
Yep.
They had the wherewithal to figure out, how that was going to work in terms of reductions for the 2021 salary cap and how they were going to absorb that hit over the coming years. And I think that was probably the most surprising agreement that they were able to come to in this, because money's always a fight in these negotiations. And I think to be able to come to that agreement relatively quickly, I think it kind of just shows you how strong the actual, the product is for the NFL, and maybe actually for once having, the game, being at the forefront of their minds, maybe not their individual interests.
Well, it's 47%. We have all sorts of links on what it is, but
Right.
the percentage of defined gross revenues, defined, football-related income, if you will, was expanded, very generously. There's even kickers for media increases. Right. We'll have details on that, but at the end of the day, Demore Smith, when he was a guest for us during the summer, said, right, that the middle class got richer.
Right.
That's really who was most benefited by this CBA. Yeah. But we'll do a deeper dive on that. But what's remarkable is they were unlike. The whole book is filled with nothing but taking Commissioner Goodell to court over this, that, and the other personal conduct policy violation. Got a 10-year agreement, right, in place. Now it's being challenged. There are certain people who say it wasn't validly. It was a very close vote. It almost didn't get through. There are still members challenging the validity of the vote.
Right.
There's some links on that. But at the end of the day, we've really got pretty strong labor peace, such as we've not seen for a long time between Demore Smith and Roger Goodell and the Management Council and the negotiating team, still led by Jeff Pash. I think it's fair to say it was remarkable they were able to come together on each of these points so quickly.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, we will have links that'll kind of take you through the good, the bad, and the ugly of that 2020 CBA. But yeah, I think because they weren't required to execute an agreement now. There was, I guess, by saying that, it wasn't expiring now. They did have a full another year to negotiate. Right. And so yeah, I guess so. This new CBA does take us through this last year of the old CBA, and then extends for 10 more years. So we'll have at least 11 years of labor.
11 years of labor peace. Yeah. Thank God. Okay. Well, we want to keep this about 30, 45 minutes. Maybe just scroll through the rest real quickly. Yep. We'll be spending more time in the first class on Commissioner's Authority. All sorts of playoff expansion, multiple rule implementations, lots of details to follow. The vault links, as we call them, are accessible. They will essentially follow this. These are updates to bring the legal evolution to its current state as we sit here today in mid to late August, and as we enter into the course in the fall term. So I guess any final words, Ryan or Zach, if you want to take down the PowerPoint, please, and just go to gallery view. Terrific. Thanks. Welcome back, guys. Great job. Any final words, Ryan?
just that sports have probably evolved more in the last year than the previous 50. So keep up to date with the current events.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. Zach, what are you thinking NBA wise?
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be taking this course. There's so many things that are just happening every single day. It's a good time.
It's fun. Aaron, NFL, you predict they'll get through the season?
I'm gonna plead the fifth. I'm not 100% sure, and I think what Ryan said is pretty important. Stay up to date on current events, and I'm sure these guys will make sure that you are, even if you aren't doing it yourself.
We'll have class plans each week with updated links, and we invite y'all to send them in so we can talk about them during class. And we'll bring this first Zoom session to a conclusion, and we'll upload it. So in this Zoom world, you'll be able to get a running start on sports and the law, the legal evolution of America's 3 major leagues. So thanks for being with us tonight, and we'll close it out. And please, everybody, stay very safe. Stay safe. That's the main thing. Good night.